Mark, it is so nice to have you here today. Can you tell us a little bit about this film and how it came to be? What got you interested in this subject?
Well, what got me interested in the subject was working with Nebraskans for Peace. I'd been away from Nebraska, grew up in Nebraska, had been away for 15 years. When I came back in 2000, I re-engaged with Nebraskans for Peace. I'd been involved with them when I lived here before. And white clay is one of the social justice issues that Nebraskans for Peace has been working on very diligently and hard since 1999. Some friends asked me to take an interest in doing some video work on this. I'd made a couple of small films here in Nebraska, documentary films, and I agreed. And after 2 sessions, basically white clay chose me. I mean, I'd gone up in June of 2003 to white clay and Pine Ridge Reservation, just across the border in South Dakota.
Can
and
I back up for just
amazing.
a second to
Sure.
go and make sure that our viewers know what white clay is? Can you tell us about that town?
White Clay is an unincorporated village. Currently its population is 14, maybe even less now.
People?
14 people. 14 people.
Okay.
It lies right on the edge on the Nebraska side of the border with the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, which lies almost entirely in South Dakota. There's 1 square mile that lies in Nebraska that's nobody lives on. This town currently has 4 off-sale beer stores and sells 11 to 12,000 cans of beer each day on average to essentially the residents of Pine Ridge. Pine Ridge has been a dry reservation virtually forever. And the residents, the elders, the government on Pine Ridge, the Oglala Sioux tribe, have been working since the 70s to get the state of Nebraska to, at a minimum, provide adequate law enforcement in the town, but ideally to stop the sale of alcohol there.
At White Clay.
At White Clay. It's literally in walking distance of the population center of Pine Ridge Reservation. If you go up into White Clay, you see people drinking on the streets, sleeping it off. There are countless fights that occur there in the nights. People sleep there in abandoned houses. People die there. They die of exposure in the winter. They die of liver failure. It's a skid row. It's the skid row of the prairie, skid row of Nebraska.
So Pine Ridge Reservation, Indian Reservation, is the poorest Indian reservation in the United States. Is that true?
I think it may be the second poorest.
Okay.
In the 2000 census, it got knocked off of that claim to fame.
Okay.
Pine Ridge, until 2000, officially lied on the 2 poorest counties in the United States.
Okay.
Poorer than counties in Appalachia or whatever you might imagine where poverty lives. These are the poorest counties in the United States. According to the 2000 census, it was knocked down to be replaced by another one of the Sioux reservations on South Dakota.
Okay.
So all the reservations, the Sioux reservations in north of Nebraska, are suffering from crippling poverty.
And often when people are in poverty, their basic human needs are not being met, of shelter, food, education, etc. And then often out of desperation comes alcoholism. Is that correct?
Oh, certainly. I don't have a lot of the statistics at my fingertips on Pine Ridge, but 75 or 85 or more % of the population is unemployed on Pine Ridge. This is a population estimated at about 40,000 people sitting on 2.5 counties in South Dakota. I heard a statistic last week collected by some Creighton Prep high school students who've taken an interest in this subject, that 40% of the houses, of the homes on Pine Ridge do not have electricity. It's 60% or more, 2/3 or more live below the federal poverty line. When you go up there, for us, I mean, it's in Lincoln, it's a 7 to 8 hour trip by car. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind most of the time. But there are no banks on the reservation. There are very few businesses that succeed on the reservation. If you think about it, the amount of people in a 2.5 county zone, 40,000 people in a 2.5 county zone north of the panhandle of Nebraska is an awful lot of people to expect to eke out a living, even in a community where there's some sort of vibrant ranching or retail. I mean, that part of Nebraska and South Dakota is shrinking all the time, and yet you have this concentration of really poor people with very little economic development. Gangs are sort of a way of life for the youth growing up there. There are certainly precious few jobs for kids. Alcohol is pervasive. Cocaine and meth and marijuana are used widely and distributed. The desperation is bad. Most of the money that comes to Pine Ridge, or I believe most of the reservations in the United States, comes under treaty obligations, old treaty obligations, but basically health care is taken care of by the Indian Health Service, out of a federal agency. Schools are funded not by property taxes as they are and state aid in Nebraska and South Dakota and most places, but that money comes again from federal appropriations. The tribal government business is funded, and the reality is the funding from Washington has declined quite significantly in the last 10 years. So here you have a scenario. On one hand, today we are trembling that in the United States we may have double-digit unemployment, and we're having economic crisis. Banks are in trouble not lending money. Unemployment may cross the 10% threshold. On Pine Ridge, other reservations in South Dakota, across the United States, unemployment has always been in the double digits. As I say, Pine Ridge is 85%. You don't talk about banks with tight credit on Pine Ridge. There are no banks there. And yet somehow that is not a priority for people in Washington, for people in South Dakota or Nebraska. It's we don't have to think about that. And Whiteclay is really an example, an egregious example of the kind of neglect that our mainstream, larger culture in the United States, the kind of neglect that we have towards Native American issues and Indian reservations.